So the title of today's talk is, the symposium rather, is Surviving Turbulent Times, Reflections on Midlife and Jung's Red Book. It was the hope of the program committee in putting this group of speakers together that the combined contributions from today's presenters would bring us into a space of reflection in relationship to Jung's Red Book as it impacts our lives during these very turbulent times. It is my sense that today's presentations will be very intellectually stimulating, but much more than that. They will, I am sure, be inviting you to let in new insights, to get into you, to stir you up, to perhaps challenge inner assumptions, to let you consider unlived and perhaps unthought parts of yourselves as you experience their experience of the Red Book. And the first of those speakers is my beloved colleague, I would like to call you, Ulanov, an inspiration to many, many people in the Jungian world. As you read in today's program, Anne lives and practices as a psychoanalyst in New York City. She is a professor of psychiatry and religion at Union Theological Seminary. For me to say that she is the author of many books misses the point. You know when you read a book and you know when that book changes your life? Well, that's what happened to me and has happened to many people with Anne's books. These are the kind of books that Anne writes. We all have our favorites. For me, it was Cinderella and her sisters. It was a big deal. But she also gives talks that do the same. I have had the pleasure of being at several of Anne's talks. And they can go in surprising directions. Just when you think you are listening to a talk about Jung, you find yourself hearing her reflections about jazz and how much she loves her husband. So let's now listen to Anne and be sure you are open to more surprises. I welcome you, Anne.
Thank you. I want to make sure everyone can hear me, so if you don't hear me, raise your hand and I will speak louder. Turbulent times make us question whether we can survive them. But even more, what has our life been and what has it not been? We know these questions in response to traumatic events that have knocked us over, and to a general anxiety that convinces us something essential is going missing. That sense of gap happened to Jung. He said in his 40th year, I had achieved everything that I wished for myself: honor, power, wealth, knowledge, every human happiness. But the bottom dropped out, and he was able to name that gap as his missing soul. For us to take up the Red Book is to enter the turmoil of turbulent times. Jung's experience expressed in text and vision, word and painting stirs us where we might feel something essential is missing. And our experience is peculiarly our own, not the same as Jung's. Indeed, he says repeatedly, follow your own way, you have it. Do not let my way be an obstacle for you. You have your mysteries, and I have mine. He offers us a guide for showing what happens to him. He lets his problems show. He exposes his horror, his terror, his overwhelm, and his confusion. And we can only admire his brute strength, in facing all that encounters him, forcing him to live, quote, what he had never lived. The type of path that unfolds in the Red Book will be like our own, but not identical to it. We share the pattern, but the contents are individual. And entering this book exposes gaps in us that we have never lived, that the unconscious will confront us with, presenting us with what needs to be lived. As we work hard to receive this book, the book will work us, stirring archetypal layers and beyond, opening our lives to what we have lived and what we have not dared and what we can still live. So full living fully means all of it. The bad and the good, the undeveloped and the accomplished, the disordered and the rules, the terrifying as well as the acceptable. Jung writes, the fullness of life is beautiful and hateful, good and evil, laughable and serious, human and inhuman. So this is not a venture where we land on our feet and find ourselves finally strong. It's a venture where we fall into confusion and fear, revulsion, as well as wonder and the new. In letting the book work us, I suggest don't let anything get between you and the book. Our interpretations, our objections to one or other translation, our theorizing, all of those can be seen as attempts to ward off, protect us from the impact of the book. No, do what Jung does. Let the psychic images present themselves, consent to immediate experience, and only then reflect on what has happened. Only then take up interpretations or objections. And I will try to do this by citing many of Jung's words as I go along. What happens to Jung is breakdown of our usual way of living, what he calls a plunge into chaos. Quote, the nameless spirit of the depths works everything that man cannot. You open the gates of the soul to let the dark flood of chaos flow into your order and meaning. Pray to your depths, waken the dead. Incapacity will overcome us, and it demands its share of life. Our incapacity is everything we've left out, that then lies undeveloped and subject to what he calls the mercy of decay. And now comes to the fore, insisting to be lived. But we cannot consent to this inferior part, because we do not, says Jung, yet possess greater virtue, which this greater height requires. Jung says we must create it by learning to live with our incapacity. Give it life. How else will it develop into ability? But to do that is not easy. Jung says he who enters into his own must grope through what lies at hand. He must sense his way from stone to stone. Embrace the worthless and the worthy with the same love. Judgment must fall from you, even taste, and above all pride, even when it's based on merit. Let your hope serve you as a guide in this world of darkness. Darkness means losing all our accustomed ways of doing and being, and even more, losing the means to think about, to imagine, to form rules that could guide us. We lose the rules, and we lose the way of knowing that we ever had rules. Jung says, my deep interior is a volcano that pushes out the fiery molten mass of the unformed and the undifferentiated that gives birth to the children of chaos. He who enters also becomes chaotic matter. He melts. The formed in him dissolves. It binds itself anew with the children of chaos, the powers of darkness, the ruling and the seducing, the compelling and the alluring, the divine and the devilish. The powers stretch beyond my certainties and limits and connect me with all distant beings and things. Jung sinks, he says, into great depths. I'm in black dirt up to my ankles in a dark cave. I crawl through a narrow crack in the rock. I glimpse a luminous red stone. I wade through the muddy water. Someone slain floats there. A large black scarab floats past. In the deepest reach of the stream shines a red sun. 1,000 serpents crowd around, veiling the sun, and thick red blood springs up. I am seized by fear. Jung grasps, quote, I take part in that murder, the slain body floating by. The sun of the depths also shines in me after the murder has been accomplished. The 1,000 serpents which want to devour the sun are also in me. I myself am the murderer and the murdered, sacrificer and sacrificed. The blood streams out of me. What looks solitary and individual, so much so that Jung thinks and fears he might be breaking down into a psychosis, widens out to the others, to the collective, connecting himself, as he wrote, with all distant beings and things. So the journey is both his own and shows a pattern applicable to the life of psyche in every one of us. And we glean from his struggle that what we avoid in ourselves, we act out on our neighbor. And remember, at that time was the Battle of Mars, the Battle of Ypres. They were happening, and Jung sees and says, if we do not kill the hero in ourselves, we kill the hero in our neighbor. Quote, they should sacrifice the hero in themselves, and because they do not do this or know this, they kill their courageous brother. Suffer it yourself through your own hand. Know that it is your heinous and devilish hand that inflicts the suffering on you, but not on your brother, who wrestles with his own devils. Jung urges us to see these riddles. Quote, those who cannot must live them as a blind fate. So to combat the war that falls upon us impersonally, as suffering impersonally imposed, we must personally take up the antagonism within ourselves, suffer the murdering acts that we do, the sacrifices we must make. This connects us to others far and wide, and awakens in us what is dead, what is not lived, and that tempers the blindness of fate into personal living. Jung writes, if the hero in you is slain, then the sun of the depths rises in you. Everything that up till now seemed to be dead in you will come to life. But what is the hero that we must slay? And Jung answers, quote, the heroic in you is the fact that you are ruled by the thought that this or that is the good, the goal. Then we want to God, quote, to become part of its magnificence. But in fact, we're no more than hollow forms, enamored of our own design, and then unconsciously connive with cunning, he says, to get our neighbor to worship our God, this God of our formation. Concentrating only on the good, we extend a warm hand to our neighbor. But suddenly, Jung says, I feel a smooth cord around my neck. A cruel hammer blow strikes a nail into my temple. If we do not slay the hero in ourselves, what he calls also a ruling principle, we will kill the hero in our neighbor, just as our neighbor will kill the hero in us. The sacrifice will be made one way or the other. Jung's path makes clear sacrifice consciously, personally. Otherwise, sacrifice is enacted upon us and between us like an impersonal force that crushes us with meaningless suffering. He writes, the spirit of the depths overcomes the spirit of this time. It will no longer stay down. It forces us to speak. And to find his soul, Jung had to climb down to those depths. For, quote, you cannot get conscious of these unconscious facts without giving yourself to them. You really go mad. The images have so much reality, such extraordinary meaning that one is caught. They form part of the ancient mysteries, the initiation and deification of the initiate. In this mystery, you make yourself into the vessel of creation in which the opposites reconcile. So madness and creativity join. And it's a fearsome place. And the Red Book displays a sequence, first of descent into that other half of the world where chaos reigns. And seeing that, second, and a gap is introduced, a disidentification not only from what we think reality is, not only from what we feel is purposeful in life, what we establish in social relations with others, but in addition, disidentification from the very ways we reach these certainties. All of that crumbles. Jung doesn't think. He sees figures like Elijah and Salome who stroll forward and declare, we are real, not symbols. He doesn't imagine with a space of distance between him and the serpent. He looks down, and the serpent is there, entwining around his feet. The air is fetid, heavy, the light dims, his breath catches. He doesn't intuit what his soul requires. He submits to a dreadful sacrifice, from which he recoils as loathsome. He must eat part of the liver of a dead, small, headless girl. To his astonishment, this redeems his soul, who now appears as, quote, a beautiful maiden with ginger hair. Jung must acknowledge his share, quote, in this horrible guilt, for you are a man, and a man has committed this deed. Thus, Jung participates in the monstrous that connects to the most spiritual in an intensely loving and ferocious relationship with God. He writes, for the child, the image of God's formation bore my human craving, but also enclosed all the primordial and elemental powers. But those powers, in our image of God, hasten away into unending space. We must regenerate ourselves. But as the creation of God is a creative act of the highest love, the restoration of our human life signifies an act of the below. And to do this, even worse, we need the assistance of evil. We cannot do it by ourselves. Quote, but man must recognize his complicity in the act of evil by eating from the bloody sacrificial flesh. Through this act, he testifies that he recognizes good as well as evil, that he destroys the image of God's formation through withdrawing his life force for the salvation of the soul. Jung says repeatedly, don't put the force outside. Even his paintings do not portray his immediate experiences. They developed from conscious, deliberate effort over 16 years to contain the erupting molten lava of the psychic images he wrote down in only 160 days. He sets the visions forth in paint so that we can study what was live, coiling, heavy, and oppressive. Now it's framed, it's fixed. We can study it. We can reflect on the blast of experience and the soul telling him about the pivotal role that madness plays in creating meaning. He writes, madness is a special form of the spirit. It clings to all teachings and philosophies, but even more to daily life. Since life is full of craziness and at the bottom utterly illogical. Man strives for reason only so that he can make rules for himself. Life has no rules. That is its mystery, its unknown law. For him who has seen chaos, he knows that the bottom sways. That's the gap, the chink, the hole, the hiatus, even the abyss that exists alongside order and meaning. And as a result, Jung is changed, meaning is changed, ways to know meaning are changed, even God is changed. He writes, because I've fallen into the source of chaos, into the primordial beginning, I myself became smelted anew in the connection with the primordial beginning. So right here, Jung is on the edge of madness and creativity. The pathway of his life shows the way to emancipation from his problems and complexes. He writes, when you enter the world of the soul, you are like a madman. And his soul tells him, be silent. Recognize your own madness. Since men do not know that conflict occurs inside themselves, they go mad, and one blames the other. The conflict is in his own soul and is the source of outer disaster. If you're aggravated against your brother, think that you are aggravated against the brother inside you. But further still, madness includes divine madness, which is, quote, the overpowering of the spirit of this time through the spirit of the depths. And it's felt as, quote, a higher form of irrationality of life streaming through us that cannot be integrated into present-day society. Jung protests. This God wants my life. He wants to go with me, sit at table with me, to be ever present. But I'm ashamed of this God. I don't want to be divine. The divine appears to me as irrational craziness. I hate it as an absurd disturbance of my meaningful human activity. So what happens here? Jung plunges into a world of chaos, where chaos reigns. There, below joins with above, and the curse of knowledge of good and evil is lifted, which means their distinction dissolves. No single interpretation or meaning can be constructed. Quote, "For nothing protects you against the chaos other than acceptance." So Jung is ousted from the world he knows. He must leave the science of his day, embrace magic instead, which is the communication from the incomprehensible. Exile from the familiar feels like madness, and yet there is an imperative of transformation working. The creative is mixed with the crazy. Old structures get deconstructed, even, for example, his understanding of hell. He does not know about hell, he is in hell, and says to everyone, you must look at everything in your hell. Give due attention to everything that crosses your path. Quietly look into everything that excites your contempt or your rage. Thereby you accomplish the miracle I experienced with the pale maiden. It can come to something out of horrible nothingness. Similarly, he discovers we don't imitate Christ, but rather we be Christ. That's the true following of Christ. He says often he feels alone and alienated, and remember at those times psychiatrists were called alienists that dealt with madness. Yet the impetus to seek his soul takes him to, quote, the sight of the innermost, from which transformation happens. So there are many entry points into whatever the situation is, whatever the problem is that bedevils us. There are many views, and there's no certain answer, there's no right answer. If we can stand it, the space of our understanding widens out to house this diversity. And we discover, quote, we create the meaning of events. So Jung shows us the human capacity to perceive afresh, quote, undisturbed by conscious assumptions, that receives and creates symbols to display immediate experience, and the meaning we find and make of them. This is creativity hiding in what looks and feels like madness. What emerges is knowledge of the heart. It's learned, quote, in novo. It grows out of you like a green seed from the dark earth. Paradoxical knowledge moves intellectual knowledge out of center stage. Paradox includes unknowing, the incomprehensible dissolving comprehension. And what befalls us from without may transform into a divine human drive within our human self. Breakdown means feeling dislocated from the accepted, but also means finding a point of contact with the power that Jung says he now serves. Quote, I had to recognize that I am only an expression and symbol of the soul. I am thoroughly a serf, utterly obedient. Yet also, he writes, my breathing life flooded me. The image of God changes too. He writes, the meaning of events comes from the possibility of life in this world that you create. And here's the pivotal point, I think. Still Jung's words. This meaning of events is the supreme meaning. It is not in events, and it is not in the soul, but is the God standing between events and soul, the mediator of life, the way, and the bridge going across. So God is standing between our soul and the events that happen to us and happen in the world, and provides a bridge across. So then we want to ask, well, across to where? And the answer is across to the beyond and to the here and the now, to the dead and to our personal life to be lived. So we have chaos, gap, paradox, God in between soul and events, exile and meaning making. All of these affect the dead too. They come back because they know no peace, they forgot something that had to be lived. They say they did not live their animal. And for Jung, the animal lives according to God's will. It's not extravagant, it's loyal to fellow animals. And when we fail to live our animal, we treat our brother as an animal. And Philemon, who is the guide throughout the book, Jung's self-figure, he says, the dead violated the earth. They would not atone, quote, for the ox with the velvet eyes, nor do penance for the shiny oar. The dead who come back are our unlived life, Jung's own, our own. On a personal level, they are, quote, all the shapes you took in the past and left behind, what you excluded from your life, renounced and damned, awaits you. On the impersonal level, the dead are, quote, the thronging dead of human history. And remember all who were dying then in World War I. Quote, who look greedily through the empty sockets of your eyes and hope to gather up through you all the loose ends of the ages. The dead are those who fell, quote, prey to power, broken by force, not themselves. Their hordes people the land of the soul. The dead are, quote, those who passed away prematurely, incomplete, through the guilt of the good and the law. There is no good so complete that it could not do injustice and break what should not be broken. So the beyond and the here and now meet. The impersonal and the personal mingle because the dead live through us and get at us through our personal problems because the dead want to be satisfied. The dead enter us through our unlived life. They make us lament for what they missed living. And Jung says we must accept the lament of the dead. Quote, do you think the dead don't exist because you explained away immortality? They do. And quote, in the inner world there's no explaining away, as little as you can explain away the outer world. So the dead come and crowd Jung to hear Philemon's 7 sermons. They mounted demands, quote, they flung open the doors above and below. They drew many to higher and lower madness. Jung says, quote, we live only on the surface. We do not accept the dead. We want to work only with visible success. And above all, we want to be paid. But who suffered more from the tempting influence of the dead than those who have gone wholly missing on the surface of the world. And here is the main point. We have one necessary but hidden and strange work, which you must do in secret for the sake of the dead. Each must attain his own visible field and vineyard. That is, fully live your life, your own life. Jung reaches this only by dealing with Satan, with evil. He unmasks Satan's claim to be, quote, the fizz of life, seeing instead that Satan is, quote, the quintessence of evil, pure negation without force. With the help of the Kabiri, who spring up from the devil's body, whom Jung calls the elemental spirits, the creative forces below, just below our consciousness, Jung fetters the devil into the foundations of life. He builds, quote, a firm structure that could withstand the fluctuations of the personal, and therefore the immortal in me is saved. The Kabiri, who are these little gnome creatures, grow out of the flowers of the slain body of the dragon who swallowed the sun of consciousness, also Satan. They are, quote, the first formations of the unformed gold that belongs to the gods. Jung asks them, are you the earthly feet of the Godhead? And they answer, we are the juices sucked out of inertia and affixed to what is growing. We know the inexplicable laws of living matter. We carry what is dead and yet enter into the living. We placed stone on stone. Now you stand on solid ground. So the Kabiri that come from the devil's body, fettered into the foundation of life, they have something of the devil's nature, and they have something of Jung's nature. Hence they're once removed from evil, and they give away to deal with evil instead of succumbing to it. They say, as sons of the devil, we want destruction, but as your creatures, we want our destruction. We want to rise up in you through death. So they make possible a glimpse of the place of destructiveness in living, unlike the devil whose destructiveness gravitates downward into evil. Then they give Jung a flashing sword and tell him, chop us up, tear us out. They are his entanglement, quote, his madness. That is Jung's identification with his ruling principle for him thinking, he says, his formations of what is good, what is God, what is evil, his scientific thinking. And they say, then you will exist beyond your madness. Your madness is your brain. So they're telling Jung that psyche is not equivalent to brain. Each has its own reality. And by slaying the Kabiri, Jung no longer identifies with his consciousness, but accepts the gap between the meanings we create and reality. Above all, this means accepting psyche's reality as distinct and as what the spirit of the depths is communicating. So in this drama, with forging Satan into the foundation stone of human life, we see the place of destructiveness in life. Denied, it wreaks havoc on the self and through us on the neighbor. Admitted, it's forged into a stone foundation from which life can be lived to the fullest. The dead are our unlived life, both here and beyond. On a personal level, our unlived life shows in what we do not dare, do not see, do not hope, what we refuse to be conscious of, and above all, what we each need to meet before we die, and can meet if we're lucky. It's the life, these are Jung's words, I could still live and should live. The thoughts I can still think and should think. So it's not so much solving our problems. It's facing and trying to carry them, work them so they're part of us, and we are not captive to them. That effort protects our children, our parents, our neighbors, our society, our nation, indeed, the whole human family, from the unlived life seeping into them to their devastation. That unlived life that is our burden to carry, not theirs. And Jung says if we try to live our lives, we learn this other way of knowing, quote, you can attain knowledge of the heart only by living life to the full. And you live your life fully if you also live what you never yet lived. The life I could still live, I should live. You cannot flee yourself. It demands fulfillment. The spirit of the depths demands that life that you could still live, you should live. Well-being decides, not your well-being, not my well-being, but between us, well-being, between us and others in society on the whole. So here again is the impersonal in contrast to the personal. It lives between us, and it may differ from what we think it is, wish it to be, think it should be. In contrast, the dead who come back and know no rest, who besiege us are souls who have not fulfilled the principium individuationis. Insofar as we do not fulfill it, the dead have a claim on us, and we cannot escape them. But Jung finds how to satisfy the dead. I lived what I had not lived before. I lived into the depths, and they taught me the other truth, and it united sense and nonsense in me. And he finds his way to do this through relation to the serpent. I'm no longer threatened by the dead, he writes, since I accepted their demands through accepting the serpent. Through this I have taken over something of the dead into my day. He calls the serpent, quote, the earthly essence of man, of which he's not conscious. The mystery that flows to us from the nourishing Earth Mother, from which everything that becomes emerges. He writes, by uniting myself with the serpent, and it's an erotic union, just as a man unites with a woman, Jung accepts the serpent as belonging to himself, and that's what frees him from the devil's power. Because usually we assign everything serpent-like to the devil, but then the force is out there, and the devil has power over us, and we end up making a pact with the devil. Taking the serpent into ourselves means the devil cannot influence us. On the impersonal level, the dead are the demands of the general force of life. The demands it imposes on us, despite our personal strivings, ambitions, and needs. This is close to what Jung calls abraxas, the blind libido, the creative drive, form and formation, sheer effectiveness that unites fullness, vital force, God, and sucking gorge of emptiness, devil. Impersonal events, remote from personal causation, happen to all of us, fall upon us, crush us, like the terminal illness of our child. Being born in a famine-torn country, or a country flooded by a tsunami. Being female in a national conflict where women become weapons of war, raped to inflict rage and assert conquering. The impersonal is fate, bad luck. The wrong person shows up and breaks our heart. An extreme crisis happens and breaks our nerve. To put it crudely, the impersonal is shit happens for no rhyme or reason, and we must deal with it. The impersonal can also fall on us as a general good luck. Against all odds, we're a loved child. We're born into a country where you can buy bananas in the market all year long. You can object aloud to a government and not be shot or imprisoned. For you, the medicine works. An elder gives you opportunities. The owner dies just in time for you to take over the business. Paradox characterizes our relating the personal and the impersonal, and Jung goes up right to the borderline between them. He writes, the symbol of the crystal signifies the unalterable law of events that comes of itself. People in their blindness want to understand them as outer events. It's an inner happening. So he's saying we must make the external, impersonal happening that befalls us into an inner happening. He says, for example, the devastations of war, meaning then World War I, force us towards self-sacrifice because we find ourselves helpless before such destructiveness. Our sacrifice is to face such wrecking power as belonging in ourselves, not just falling on us from without. So Jung finds the nexus point, the connecting point between the dead and the living, the blinding personal force of life, and the personal creating of meaning of life. The formless, which he calls in the book the pleroma, meaning the all in all, the open-ended, uncreated, comes into createdness here and now through Jung's response. So he demonstrates the exchange of an outer happening for an inner realization. We can make something of our experience of what is there and not there. And that indeterminacy opens a space between soul and event where God exists and pulls something across into the new. This may look mad, it may even look like paranoia, where we find in everything connections to ourselves. But the other side of paranoia is synchronicity, a consciousness of the interconnectedness of everything, of our small place in the large whole, the unus mundus. In claiming what is true for us, creating its representation in word or picture or text or ritual, we share it with the world. Jung brings his personal living right to the border of impersonal fate. And he describes doing this in relation to the dead and shows them both sides, both opposite sides of paradox. Whereas he makes personal the impersonal event that happens, here he gives up the personal through a kind of death while alive, so that, he writes, the immortal in me can thrive. He says, quote, "Death gives me durability, solidity. So long as I wanted to satisfy my own demands, I was personal and living in the sense of the world. But when I recognized the demands of the dead in me and satisfied them, I gave up my earlier personal striving, and the world had to take me for a dead man." And remember, Jung gave up his position at the university. He gave up his presidency of the psychoanalytic community, and he gave up finally his editorship of the Jahrbuch of psychoanalysis. He says, "A great cold comes over whomever recognizes the demands of the dead and seeks to satisfy them. But the threat, fear, and restlessness cease, and everything that previously lurked hungrily in him no longer lives with him in his day, and his life is beautiful because he is himself." So on this side of the paradox, the impersonal intercedes in the personal. We might say our living in the spirit of the times and its values gives way to living in the spirit of the depths, which we share with everybody. In terms of Jung's later theory, we might say our ego demands give way to the reality of the self. And Jung says, quote, "Insofar as it takes place in me, and I am a part of the world, it also takes place through me in the world. It doesn't take place according to my will. It applies not to me, but to the symbol. The symbol becomes my unfailing Lord, commander." So the paradox works both ways. We take hold of our personal life and make the impersonal happening our own. And we sacrifice our personal strivings to meet the demands of the dead, of our unlived life, of what we can still live and ought to live, thus achieving the isness of the impersonal. Jung writes, "One is lived by the self. One does not live oneself. It lives itself. And, quote, my life wants itself whole." So finding our connection to the Red Book changes our sense of our personal problems. In my Poison Ivy book, it became clear to me that our problems get included in our theories and in our attempted solutions of our problems. For example, Bion, who described himself as markedly schizoid, surely includes his schizoidness in his grid, which is to map the interchanges between the analysand and the analyst. My response to the Red Book takes me still a further step. Our personal problems, our madness, not only contribute to theories or solutions or creative gestures we may make. More, our personal problems show us our path. They lay out, they hand us our task, they delimit and direct our suffering. Jung writes, "To live oneself means to be one's own task, alone suffering." So this is not a cheery view. You know, we'll take something grueling and make something fluffy and good out of it. This is a very tough view. It's hard as stone, but also is durable. Our problem, I would suggest, is our path. It shows the way. Creativity generates pathways in the madness we suffer. And the problems we suffer opens the pathway. I would give the Red Book as the principal example. Jung says, "My entire life consisted in elaborating what had burst forth from the unconscious, The numinous beginning, which contained everything, was then. So the peculiar idiosyncratic genius of each person shows in their madness, and their madness keeps them working on the unfolding of their creative genius. Jung describes this path as going through the gate, quote, utterly poor, miserable, unknowingly humiliated, go through the gate, unquote. The madness of our personal problem connects us to our God-making capacity that Jung describes as at the edge of what we know. Beyond that lies the beyond. Our pathway to it, our gateway to it, is to see what passes through us. Philemon says near the end of the book, man is a gateway through which crowds the train of the gods and the coming and passing of all times. Man does not do it, does not create it, does not suffer it. Since he is the being, the sole being, since he is the moment of the world, the eternal moment, whoever recognizes this lasts and his transitoriness is over. He has become someone who is. Now, ambiguity clings to this statement. Is it the gods, or is it us who is the eternal moment? We are not the flow of being, and yet it's through us, the human being. The nexus of eternal flowing through mortal, impersonal through personal, creative through madness, comprises, quote, the eternal moment. We are the aperture, the opening, the moment in which the conjoining appears. And this made me remember what Jung carved over his house's front door. Cold or not, God will be present. To alert to God's presence is to be, or to make possible, the eternal moment. Living our life fully means living with the gap between the God we create and the God beyond this God. It means accepting that truth is found in our recognizing that whatever God is ours, it is an image of God, even a new God that gets born in the soul. For image is the language of the psyche, the currency of psychic reality. Jung writes, it is not the coming of God himself, but his image which appears in the supreme meaning. And Jung says, I believe and accept that the God is something different from me. So again, he sees, don't put the primordial force outside the self into our formation of a God, but take that force back into the self, that blind creative libido, the abraxas force, back into our inner selves and make something of it in the process of individuation. That conjunction of the primordial life force and our effort to live fully links below and above, chaos and order, dead and alive, impersonal and personal, divine and human. The task of living our own way can only be found by living, and it belongs to everyone. Jung says outer events are always the same. It's a kind of collective cyclical turning. Quote, everything that happens outside has already been, but whoever looks from inside knows that it is new. The events that happen are always the same. But the creative depths of man are not always the same. We create the meaning of events, which is the way of salvation. It comes from the possibility of life in this world that you create, the assertion of your soul in this world. He says, I do not myself become the supreme meaning or the symbol. The symbol becomes in me. It has its substance and I have mine. One creates inner freedom only through the symbol. It rises out of the depths of self. If one accepts the symbol, it is as if a door opens to a new room. The symbol can neither be thought up nor found. It becomes. Jung concludes, one must live this life. This life is the way to the unfathomable, which we call divine. Thank you.
I'm interested in the integration of contemplative practice. Jung certainly used certain yogic techniques when he was going through his difficult time, although he didn't advise those for most of us. And he later then presented active imagination. But can you give, in terms of surviving turbulent times, maybe with a little bit of influence from the Red Book, a comment on the integration of contemplative with clinical practice?
The question is the relation of contemplative practices, many different kinds, and clinical practice. Well, madness leads you to stop and find something that helps you in the vortex. I think most clinicians would not find themselves recommending a specific tradition, but look and listen for the dots of light in the vortex a person is experiencing. The dots of light is an expression taken from the Midrash. I think it's Rabbi Ulanov. And it was so moving to me when I read that in the times of great darkness, dots of light, and your job is to connect them. So what appealed to me about that were those games you played as a child, like Jung with his stones. You had little things you had to connect, and voila, there was a giraffe. I think that's an example of what Jung talks about in the Red Book as from the below, as opposed to knowing about many available good contemplative practices that you could do faithfully. For instance, there's a fine old book by Le Caro, which just chapter by chapter lists all these different contemplative practices. That's fine, but it might not work because you're knowing about it and doing it from above to below, and when you're crazy, you need a dot of light in the below, in my experience. But that they go together, that one helps the other without question. Please.
Yeah, when you were quoting Jung, I noticed that Jung often would say the God or the gods. But then when you would speak, you might drop the and talk about God. And so for me, that switches Jung's ideas from the sort of more paganistic, polytheistic approach to a more monotheistic religious approach, maybe from an archetypal psychology approach to a religious approach. And I'm wondering if you might just comment on that?
The question wants a comment on the notion of the gods or God, in contrast to God, the archetypal approach, perhaps to the religious. Well, yes and no about Jung. Because when you read him, in certainly the Red Book, and when you read him in Memories, he accepts there are many formations of God and that we don't know from our side. We can't equate our formation with the reality. There's always that gap. But when he's writing about his own distress and his own prayerful acknowledgments, then that formation is God and is religious. So I think, again, like the previous question, it's left open. What is your way? What have you found? Now, if we were having a debate on the level of the above, then we could get into quite a feisty discussion, even a food fight, but this is polytheism, but this is monotheism, both of which have great big shadows. I think the point of the Red Book is live your life and find what it is for you. And so I would stay on that level today, I think. Please.
I have two questions. One is a little personal in a way. That is, after so many years of studying Jung, could you tell us a little bit about the very first thoughts after reading the book?
Okay, that's question one.
Question one. Question two is, we were politicians, national leaders, image makers. How would you think about doing the Red Book to them? To translate from the psychological
To the
moving.
Okay, first question is, what was my first reaction to the Red Book? Oh, it was dreadful. I thought I'm sunk. It took me at most, the most I could read was 3 pages. And the next day I couldn't remember anything I read. And so it took me forever to read through it. And it got easier with other readings, but I think I think the book works you. And you have to be prepared for that. That's what I meant in the beginning. Don't put something between you and the book, which you're tempted to do because you feel absolutely nuts, or I did. I can't make head or tail out of this. This is crazy. And it was so comforting when he said, in effect, this is crazy. I thought, oh, what now? I'm right track. But you have to, it takes you down. So you have to be prepared for that. And even after you've read it a number of times, things happen, things start happening, which are quite frightening. Where outer things happen that concur with what you've been reading. And it feels as if the containers get very permeable, very porous. So you're not sure whether you've lost it, or you think, yes, I've lost it, but you only have courage to do this, and his is much bigger than mine, so maybe I could go on. It's very unsettling. I felt worked over. And when I read it again, I feel worked over in another way. Now the second question is, what could any of us say to people who are functioning in the world as politicians particularly, but as rule makers and image makers? I would say everybody here is certainly an image maker. Whether we get to set political position papers or not is another question. But what would the Red Book, how could one use the Red Book in relation to that kind of thing? That's a big, important question. It has to do, again, with the influence that is exerted when above and below come together. As Jung says, I exist in the world, therefore what happens in me happens in the world, even though you get the feeling that this journey of his was very solitary and individual. So in that way, even a day like whole day on the Red Book. If we had certain goggles that saw things like night goggles, maybe there's an influence that goes out into the collective that changes. I don't changes what happens, what occurs to people. It's as if we were a bunch of plants and we make more oxygen. I don't think you get it by saying to your congresswoman, I'm sending you the Red Book. Read page. In the first place, you have to send a Sherpa to carry it and something to put it on. All our tables are taken up with this monstrous thing. So I would say a Jung who seems so lonely found a community through collective traditions. And you could even say he found his self-objects there, his in Coa's terms, or his transitional objects in Winnicott's terms, so that he makes available, he aerates the collective. And I think insofar as we do this, it might affect. So we'll have to see what happens in Wisconsin and what happens in other nearby states. Please, Asha.
And in Eastern scriptures, it says that we are all drops that carry the wisdom of the ocean in us. In other words, we are the specks of transience which carries the memory of the eternal bodies in us. Now, what that means is, from what you just said, and the clinical implications, how to treat an individual in your office, is that if you are to live out the unlived ancestral issues, which is an archetypal application, or the unlived reptilian consciousness, which is a reptilian consciousness. So those are the three layers of our consciousness, the archetypal, the reptilian, and the neocortical, which is where the ego does its work. Now, what all this means in terms of the patient who's sitting in your office is that we have the DNA which carries all this information of eternal in the transit. It's translated via the RNA into your symptoms or intentions. So if we can manipulate it at that point, where the rubber makes the road, we have a choice. The choice is we either succumb to that issue or we somehow conceal it. I have a patient right now who is a researcher in a certain medical system. He's afflicted with a disease that he had been researched all his life. And it's coming from his ancestral energy, which is what motivates him. And he's at this edge of succumbing to the disease or making a tendency protocol. And I think the whole dynamic in this inner world has to do with staying on the cutting edge between somehow coming up with it's not pure protocol that we have to offer, versus succumbing to it before he can talk from his curious red book has some guidance to your
Okay, I'm trying to repeat this, which is harder than giving a response. Ashraf Bedi is saying we have, each of us, we're a drop in the ocean, and we have in our DNA all this archetypal brain, reptilian brain, and neocortical brain. And so how does the Red Book speak to that and to the patient in the clinical session? And he gives a brief example of someone he's working with who is afflicted with a disease he has been researching as a scientist all his life, and how not to succumb, but to give a individual personal response to this disease that might change the protocol for everybody else. So how does this work clinically? Well, I would agree with everything you say about the ancestral that we come with, and the way you said it. I would emphasize, and I think curiously, the Red Book emphasizes, but what is your personal response? So your researcher, let's say he doesn't even come up with a new creative something that changes the protocol, but he does work for that. He suffers for that. That's his personal response to something ancestral. That's the nexus point. Not just the collective is in us, but we are in the collective. So what you or I do, what we don't do, makes a difference. I think that's a faith Jung has and shows in the Red Book. So when you're working with your adolescents, it's right there happening. It isn't dependent on the success. It's dependent on making the outer disease an inner realization and marshaling everything you have in you to your personal creative response in that session. And that's what keeps those of us who've been working as analysts for decades alive and excited. You just never know what's going to happen in a particular session. It's that meeting point. And this would go back to the question about the gods and God. We're not infinite. We can't worship 40 gods. We're lucky if we get to worship one. So that there may be many, but which is the one or the two for us? That's the thing that happens from below. So that's how I'd say it. Incomplete, but that's the point. Yes, sir.
During the years, Jung was working with the Red Book. He also wrote psychological types. But in psychological types, he had an amazing 18 pages on Meister Eckhart, where Eckhart makes the distinction between two ways of knowing the divine. One is the human way, in which we use images, human images, and the other is the mystery itself and encountering the mystery. And it's interesting that I've learned that when he uses the word God to mean that which is a human way of imaging, in both Latin and German that Eckhart knew, the God is in the masculine, Deus, in Latin. I don't know the German. And the mystery itself is deitas, which is feminine in both languages. What I'm asking is the play between these two. Can you help us understand how that goes, the play between these two aspects is going on in the Red Book?
Well, I'm not an Eckhart scholar, so I can't answer specifically for him. Jung is very repetitive in saying, in effect, you have formations. He even has two steps. You have images of your formation of God. So I have an image of a formation of God. I don't have God directly. But then there are these eruptions where what you're calling the mystery in that, in Eckhart, the God behind the Godhead, just breaks in on you. And that you suffer in the sense of it happens to you. So you have that on the other side. And then you have to spend a lot of time. This would be back to the question about the contemplative exercises, which gives you the wherewithal to digest, to process, to go over, to get a formation of which you can then get an image. This would be the religious life. That's what religious people are hung up on. They're fascinated by what happened and how do we think and feel and act in relation to it. Now, the masculine and feminine, I'll just say one thing that your question makes me think of, but it's not really an answer in any way. I think of the Platonic through the history of the notion of Korah, which is the before creation time, which is usually thought of as feminine. There's a wonderful church in Istanbul called the Church of Korah, and it's a Christian church, so the two images, one is, well, I won't go into it, it's too long to describe both of them, but the images of the mother holding the child, but underneath the two mandalas is Korah, container of uncontainable. And I think that's in the line of what Jung is after, that there's uncontainable that erupts, happens, and then you have to spend time having ways to think about it, form it, images.
Yeah, I'm a student at Lutheran School of Theology, and over the last 2 years, we've had a lot of serpent images coming to me. And one thing I was taking a little bit of Greek, of course, and in my Gospels class, I learned that in the Gospels that talk about Jesus in the wilderness, in Mark and Matthew, I think both, the word that is translated as wild beasts, where he was with the wild beasts, later in Acts is translated as snake.
As what?
Snake. When Paul has his snake in his arm at Malta. And I thought that was very curious, and I thought it was way more interesting to me that Jesus was in the wilderness with the snakes. And I wondered if you knew of anyone that's looked at that in any way, and looked at that, the possibility of that reference of maybe serpent, snake.
It's yours. This is a thought you can think. You have to think it. Yes.
I'm wondering if the Red Book will make people or the divisions between Jungians as far as developmental, classical, archetypal expand a little bit further or come together more. Since some of the developmental theory that says that archetypes are not different, which sort of flies in the face of the Red Book and Jung's own experience. So I guess my question is the Red Book bringing, Jungian theory together?
Oh, Lord, let's hope so. But who knows? We don't practice very well what we preach. One would hope so. I think the response to the Red Book is just nothing short of astounding. In New York, Jung has been ignored for years in the popular press, in the New York Times. If they ever even noticed there was a Jung, he was dismissed as a complete loony. And I thought there would be, now we've got the evidence, look at this book. But instead, there's been this huge reclam and really quite favorable, at worst, neutral sort of reviews. So in terms of the general public, I think it's been a tremendous recognition of something here that we have not had words for. And when it was first published, the Rubin Museum was the place in which it was originally shown. And they tried to capitalize on that in a good way by having a series of evenings which had some problems in the design, where a celebrity, poor celebrity, sitting on stage is handed for the first time, sight unseen, one of the images from the Red Book and said, now speak to us. And then in conjunction with that, there was the Jungian analyst, and it was equally frightening what we were meant to do. We couldn't ask any analytic questions. That's not ethical. We don't even know this person, and there are 300 people listening. And we were sort of a prop masters, the best way I could think of it. And if there was a synergy between the two on the stage, some remarkable things came out. But this is a long way around to say what was so touching to me, because I went to hear some of my colleagues, and then I had to do one myself with a celebrity, and the audience is what got me. Because after we talked. Then there was quite a long time for the audience to talk. And the eagerness and the probing questions and now I have found somebody who talks about something I have experienced was simply amazing and repeated. And just to give you one idea, I did with my person, one of the pictures was the, let me think what number it is, 119. It's the green dragon being killed. And so there are all these legs, it's dying and it's bloody. So the last person who asks, after all this discussion about the serpent, she says, well, you know, I feel I look at this from the point of view of the serpent. What is the serpent's experience? None of us have touched that before. So it's that kind of thing. Let's hope all of us yogos catch up with the puppet. Please.
You said that this journey went on for 16 years, and
The paintings.
and people are trying to make sense of that. And it seems like the end of that period would have been around 1927, with his dream about irreparable and that the concept of the self. And that was kind of the understanding or the ultimate, I think, that we arrived at on this journey. Could you say something about the self as the point that you arrived at, and how that may provide some kind of a framework for this initial reduction in the early paintings?
The question is about the paintings and the final, near the end. The Golden Fortress Palace is the last one, but the Liverpool mandala is, I think, very near that, and that's perhaps a symbol of the self, and to say something about that. Well, it is and it isn't, because if you read the book, it breaks off mid-sentence. It wasn't sort of a completion with lots of conclusions. It breaks off mid-sentence. Then several decades later, he tried to go back and finish it, and it broke off again in mid-sentence. And what he says is that he had received from Richard Wilhelm the Secret of the Golden Flower, and that was just an eternal moment where he saw that what that was writing about was what he was experiencing. And he broke off, he said, because that told him that alchemy was a place to look for data about what he had experienced. And he thought that would be more fertile than continuing his own work on the Red Book. And he also had conceived, and here it would be related to the later articulation of the theory of the self, he had conceived a project, a comparative study of mythologies, religions, etc., about the concept of individuation. That alchemy and individuation be a shorter route than continuing. Now, the paintings were taken from sketches, and in some of the exhibits, we got to see some of the sketches, which are very different from the paintings. They're much more alive, much less complete. And he did them every morning when he was on military duty as commandant of the British prisoners of war in a place called, in the Chateau d'Aix, D''Oex. And when he was so in turmoil, every morning he got up and sketched one of these mandalas. And the paintings were taken from those sketches, which are much more fixed and intentional. And if you look at them carefully, plus the question of what medium they're in, you can see how many hours each painting would have taken. So I understand the paintings as trying to study what the sketches told him. And there's some possibility we'll see more of the sketches, which I would like to. But the fixedness of the end of the book, I would say it's not there. It ends mid-sentence. So you don't get, and I find this very hopeful, when you think of your own madness, don't think you're going to come with huzzahs and trumpets and everything's going to be done. You're going to break off mid-sentence and do something else. We have to stop. We should break off mid-sentence.